Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to the 7th Independent Salary Commission meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 13th, and we plan to be here from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. I am going to turn it over to Liam to talk about Zoom logistics and some important announcements.
Good evening, everyone. This meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of this recording will be posted on the Salary Commission website under past meetings and events. Closed captioning is available. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom right side of your screen. And I also want to apologize. I forgot to send out invitations to our ASL and Spanish interpreters, so they will not be available for this meeting. And I apologize for that. Commissioners, please make sure you change your chat settings to everyone so folks listening in tonight can follow along. Just please note that your chat is part of public record. Meeting members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available, so you can submit your questions or comments through there. We may not be able to answer all the questions today, but they will become part of the public record as well. For tonight's meeting, there is public comment. Viewers can submit additional comments through our comment forum online, on our website, or by emailing transition@gordon.gov. Great, Jamie.
Thank you, Liam. And I think we'll see what we can do to add subtitles, Spanish subtitles, and ASL interpretation to the meeting recording at a later dates, but it is doable with other listeners. Oh, fantastic. Our Spanish application has arrived. Thank you so much. It's not showing up on my. Oh, he's saying, let's see. Okay, we are going to bring you in, Victor. Let's hear that. See Victor. Go to panelists. Rosie is in panelists. Oh my gosh. You're saving our bacon. Thank you for coming. I'm going to panelists.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If you can add us as interpreters, both Rosie and I were here.
Thank you so much. Rosie? Did that work? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Nothing like, little problems at the beginning of a very important meeting to kind of break the ice for all of us. If you could advance the slides, we are kind of happy to go get us to the agenda. I'm going to hand it over to Commissioner Martinez to walk us through the agenda and commission business. Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope my sound is okay. Tonight's agenda is a little bit longer, and we have great decisions to make together. And the plan is that after welcome, that we will adopt May 30th meeting minutes, and we will have public comment before the agenda, thanks to some public comments and suggestions. We will then at 6:30 discuss differential pay with the city attorney, Heidi Brown. At 7, we will talk about salary proposal options. We will have a 5-minute break to take care of our bodies and our minds so that we can be as present as possible. Then at 8, we will review and or edit communication materials that Jamie sent us. Thank you, Jamie. At 8:30, engagement plan. And then at 8:55, we will identify any next steps, and we will adjourn at 9 p.m. And with that, I believe I pass it on to Commissioner Cooney.
Commissioner Martinez, I think you need to walk us through some commission business first.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that, but I think I need to do the meeting minutes. Okay. So, do we approve May 30th meeting minutes? Thank you. Fist of 5 or fist 2-5. There are different ways of calling that. Okay. Great. All right, we have, I believe that is all of us voting members. The minutes are then approved. And we have the public comment report. We had a new public comment, which essentially advised us on some materials to be posted and advised us on having the public comments before we make decisions on each meeting, which is in the spirit of democracy. So thank you to our public for your counsel. And we will have now, yes, Commissioner Cooney will facilitate public comment.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm gonna, hold on.
Never mind, I was trying a different item. Can you hear us? Is it super awful? Is it awful enough that we need to fix it? This is what I need to know. Can you? Is it like intolerable?
No, we can tolerate it.
Okay. So sorry about that. I don't know how else to fix it at this moment. If anyone has good ideas, log them in the chat or the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Cooney.
All right, thank you. Oh, hold on one second. I'm sorry, I had my notes up and now my computer just decided to have a mind of its own. So one moment here. Okay. So we're now going to take public comment. Community members had the opportunity to sign up to make a public comment on the website. We're going to first call on folks who've signed up online and then folks who signed up in person. And if we have time left on the agenda item, we will open up to anyone else who would like to testify. If you haven't signed up to testify and would like to testify today, you can let staff know by raising your Zoom hand or putting it in the Zoom Q&A. When it is your turn to testify, we will bring you into the main room and you will have 3 minutes to share your thoughts. So just a quick note, that's 1 minute increase from our previous amount. And that was something that we agreed on before. So Jamie, do we have anybody who's signed up ahead of time to testify tonight?
We did not receive any requests to testify tonight.
Okay, and then see, did we get anybody in person or anybody adding on?
We do not have anybody in person to testify.
Okay. And I'm not seeing anybody else showing up, so once, twice. All right. Public comment is closed. All right, at this time, I believe we have our visiting speaker. Heidi Brown is our Chief Deputy City Attorney on Labor and Employment. Thank you for coming today, and we're going to go ahead and turn this over to Heidi.
Well, I'm going to note that I think Heidi is not here yet. She was planning on coming at 6:30, and we are ahead of time.
We're just so speedy. We're so speedy. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we've
so might I suggest that we move forward with the next item around our pay proposal? Let's start that conversation. It'll be perfectly appropriate when she does arrive to talk about differential pay because you'll be having that conversation live at that moment anyway. Is everyone okay with that suggestion? That's thumbs up, and we'll just keep an eye out for when she arrives.
then I think this is going over to Barb then for the salary proposal options with the floors and ceilings, differential pay and conditional proposal.
Thank you. I think I will open it up first before turning it over to Barb. So in all of our previous discussions, there've been a number of conversations you have had about how to approach a pay proposal. Certainly one of those approaches was you identified a floor last meeting. And so today, one of the decisions that you get to make is whether you will also choose a ceiling, whether it's a like pay range or a specific number that you are looking to propose to the community for feedback. So I do call it floors and ceilings. I don't think that's official BHR language, but that's how I'm thinking of it. The second question is obviously about whether or not you want to consider the differential pay structure that Commissioner Martinez proposed a couple meetings ago, at least introduced the concept to us about. And then finally, there's been some questions about whether or not you might be interested in setting a conditional proposal. And just as a reminder, what that means is, you know, there are a number of decisions that the city of Portland has yet to make, particularly around like number of, you know, staffing per office and that kind of thing. And so the question is, do you want to consider different pay numbers, different salary numbers based on some, you know, decisions that have yet to be made by the city of Portland? And suggest, you know, if the city chooses X, then the salary will be this. If the city chooses Y, the salary will be this. That conversation. So we're going to start with actually a combination of the floors and ceilings and differential pay conversation, because it's all been kind of put into the same table by Barb in Human Resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb to first walk you through a discussion of the methodology that she used to arrive at the floor, the numbers for mayor and auditor based on the conversation that you had at the last meeting. And then she also provided some very helpful pay rates based on a step process for differential pay. So I'm going to turn it over to Barb now to walk you through that.
Thank you. And good evening, everybody. So you've already received a spreadsheet with some options, and what I'm presenting here tonight is the option that you requested, as we understand it. And so we did come up with or calculate sort of entry rates for the mayor, council members, and the auditor. How about this? Is that a little bit better? Or still garbled? How about now? Same ones. Maybe a bit better.
Was there any?
Can you guys switch places maybe? Because where Jamie was sitting sounded better.
Yeah. Apologies. Your difficulty.
You might just have to project a little.
Got it. So you did receive several options for entry rates or base rates or floors for the mayor and the auditor salaries. And at our last meeting, you did decide on the base pay or the floor for council members, and you based that on driving wage for one individual with one child. Was sort of your floor for the council members, and the sort of task after that is to determine the floor for the mayor and the auditor. So I will walk you through how we arrived at that floor. So I'll talk you through it in this slide. And then in the next slide, I've broken it down into what I think would be the easier to understand with numbers and calculations. And then in the final slide, you'll actually see the rates. So I'll just ask you to bear with me until we get to that final slide with the rates. I think it'll make sense by the time we get there. But of course, once we do, I'm happy to answer any questions. So essentially, we took a look in order to determine the floor for the mayor. We took a look at each city and we looked at what the mayor was earning and we looked at what the council member was earning. And we determined what the percentage difference was between those two salary rates. So for example, we looked at Boston, saw what the mayor was making, saw what the council member was making, and determined what that percentage difference was. What was the difference between those two numbers? And we went down the list. So for every city where we had rates for council members, the mayor, and the auditor, we went down the list and determined what the difference was between those rates, the percentage difference. Then once we had the whole list of all of the cities and all of the differences in percentages between the pay of the mayor and the council member, then we took an average of what that percentage difference was and applied that to the market average for the council member. And that is how we derived the rate, the base rate, the floor rate for the mayor. And then we did the same thing for the auditor. So we took the council member pay rate for Boston, took the auditor pay rate for Boston and determined what the percentage difference was between those two numbers. Did that for each city. Then determined what the average percent difference was for all of the cities. And then applied that to the market average of the council member to determine the base pay of the auditor. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but I think the next slide will give you a little bit better sort of representation of what that is. So again, in our example here, you see in Baltimore, the mayor is earning 194,907. Council members earn 74,347, and the difference in pay is 76%. So in Boston, same scenario. We see the mayor's salary here. We see the council member salary, and there's a 67% difference in those two areas. So once we went through the list of all of the cities that we had data from, we looked at that 76%, the 67%, that whole list of percent differences, and found the average percent difference. And then we added that to the council member market average to arrive at the base pay. So all of those averages between the mayor and the council member, the average difference in pay was 57% once we went through the list. And we applied that 57% to the market average for council members. That was in the early data that you received, the council member market average, 111,760. We add 57% to that. That is how we arrived at the base pay for the mayor. And then we did the same thing for the auditor's salary. So we took each city, Baltimore, we took the auditor's salary and the council member's salary, determined the percentage difference between those two numbers, went down the list, found that percent difference, and then applied it to the council member market average, and that was our base pay for it. Are there questions so far? All right, let's look at the next slide. So here are in the base pay column, the first column, to see where we ended up with our calculation using that methodology. At the last meeting, you set the council floor at 142,404. That was based on the thriving wage for one individual child. And then so we had that established, and then we used our methodology as just described, to find the floor for the mayor and auditor. So that's the base pay column. You see there, same numbers in both charts. And then in the top chart, if you are going to pursue sort of a differential rate or a step system, applying increases for certain characteristics or qualifications, if you want to apply a step increase of 3% or a differential of 3% from the base rate, you see that for the mayor, the base is 175,463. If you increase that by 3%, you get the number there at the top, the step one column, 187.27, and so on. So each of those columns represents a 3% increase, which might be your model for applying a differential for certain qualities or characteristics or properties. And the bottom chart is simply the same thing, except for there is a 5% spread between the base and the first step, and then from the first step to the second step, it's a 5% increase, and so on. Questions about any of that?
So this is the time for discussion. Are these the floor salaries that you want to arrive at?
It looks like Commissioner Sampson has a question.
There we go.
Thank you. I was just trying to follow. I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So if we take like Baltimore as the example, and you say there's 76% difference between, so you're saying that like if we took Baltimore's council member and we added on 76% to that pay, it should arrive to the Baltimore mayor's pay?
No, it's a little bit different. So it's not really, one is not a percent difference between those two numbers. So it's just a different mathematical calculation. And in the options that you received separately, the sort of calculation that you're thinking of that was in some of those other options. But for this one, it's and unfortunately I should have put the math up in a slide, but it's essentially just determine, you know, here's two numbers, what's the percent difference between them?
Okay, maybe that's the difference. I was just not arriving at the same percentages between them, and so I figured it was a different calculation, but I wasn't sure what. So maybe just understanding like how those differences were calculated. I don't know if that's something that can be done now or if that's a later item. But that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, oh, I'll probably have to put this together separately.
Commissioner Johnson, I see your hand, and then I'm just going to make a note that City Attorney Heidi Brown has arrived. So let's take your question, Commissioner Johnson, and I think let's then go back to introducing Heidi and having the conversation about the front today. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering, do you have a sheet that shows the auditor calculations in the same way that you have the mayor calculation? I think we may have just had that discussion, but I think it would be helpful if we could have another sheet. You have the mayor and how that worked, but also then maybe do one for the auditor, just to have a full record of the two positions.
Yeah, you do have that in the materials, but just not on this picture.
Okay, so okay, it's part of the packet, but it's not on the screen, right? Okay, good, thanks. That's it.
Okay. Dan, would you mind going back? Thank you. Commissioner Clooney, would you like to introduce our invited guest?
Sure. So it is now time to introduce our invited guest, Chief Deputy City Attorney Heidi Brown. Heidi has been briefed on our conversations about differential pay and is prepared to offer her perspective about the legal landscape and answer any questions we may have. Heidi, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's nice to see you all. And I'm sorry, I had a meeting up until 6 and then had to ride my bike home. So I apologize for not being able to be here right at 6 o'clock. And thank you for accommodating me. My understanding is that you're interested in considering potential legal ramifications of a language pay differential and a cultural competency pay differential. And so I want to take each one at a time. So for the language pay differential, in order to ensure that we're doing things consistently, the city has a language pay differential in existence currently. It was adopted, I think about 3 years ago by the city, and BHR Human Resources set up a process where people are tested for the level of proficiency and have a set level of proficiency that needs to be shown for whatever language that is requesting a pay differential. And there also needs to be some connection to their work. And part of that is for our pay equity law in Oregon, which requires that we pay people similarly for when they're performing work of comparable character. And there's only certain things that we can consider when paying people differently. And so it needs to connect to their work somehow. And so that's part of the assessment that gets performed. So my only ask of you to ensure that we continue complying with the pay equity law would be that if you want to provide a language pay differential, that you would do it in the manner that's already been adopted by the city, because we've been able to vet that and ensure that that complies with all legal requirements that are out there. And I don't have a lot of the specifics about what the testing involves, and if you want us to get that, I don't know, Barb, if you have that information. You're nodding. So if folks want more information about how that testing occurs, Barb could give that to you, and I'll pause here to see if that's something you'd be interested in hearing about.
Would you like to hear about that program?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, when we had our presentation from the person in Washington County, they drew some very strong distinctions between being an interpreter, being a translator, and being someone who has a working speaking knowledge who can handle general questions from the public. Does the city of Portland just determine the pay differential based on those categories, or is it just one level of proficiency? Because it was, I think, quite compelling, the case that the person from Washington County made, that they're very different skill sets. And if we're looking at this as a part of a pay differential, how do we determine that if the city doesn't already have it?
Yeah, so the city does distinguish between translation and interpretation and what we call the ability to provide access to the public. So if you are an employee earning the language pay differential, You are somebody that can help connect members of the public to resources. You can help them get services. If there is an emergency, you can coordinate a response to ensure that that person is supported. However, this is not formal translation or interpretation services, which my understanding is there's a whole legal ramification for that work. So the folks who receive our language key differential, they're tested on verbal skills. They have to meet, I think they and Liam is actually our language key differential administrator for BHR. And so I think our threshold is intermediate basic.
So yeah, the
Intermediate low for verbal. So we don't do written testing. And again, the one of the purposes of the program is just to ensure that we can provide access for folks who have limited English proficiency, not necessarily that we are providing them with an exact legal interpretation of how to fill out this permitting form. So it's really about engaging and allowing them to participate.
So Commissioner Martinez, is this kind of the level at which you are thinking about when you described the differential for language in your presentation?
Thank you for that question. It is not exactly. This is the differential language that is based on a particular kind of service. The way that we are doing it at Oregon Food Bank is twofold. One is a basic pay difference for the skill sets that come with multilingual skill sets and representation in decision making. So it's a little bit different. If we are to use the way the city is using it, it's access to resources. I would invite the city to include an analysis that is beyond services because of representation and skill sets associated with multilingual skill sets. But if, because these practices have been vetted by a lawyer, what it's important, however, in the bona fide exceptions for difference in pay is the consistency in the criteria. So if there is a test, a verbal test that is about accessing, connecting to resources, therefore to government representation, that might be a way to then do it. I don't know, however, what is the percentage difference for that specific category. So I would want to know, because this practice is more related to like service and customer service kind of thing. We wouldn't establish a city council to be an interpreter. Like that is not the function. So that would not be a criteria that I would recommend, nor I think appropriate for city council or mayor or auditor for that matter. So the way I see it intersecting is only in that connectivity to resources, and I would add to representation. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, I'm mainly interested since you have far more experience in this. I really wanted to hear how you kind of were thinking about it when we were discussing it earlier. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Cooney?
Hi there. I had a couple things. So One thing that I'm just thinking through is that we've talked before about how these positions generally do not have position descriptions of any kind. So when I hear that we need to connect a language differential to their work, I think I know, at least in my experience at my work, it's usually saying that somebody who's working in a clinic, and so they're translating or they're helping patients check in, and so it's easy to define that. So just kind of, I guess, tagging that as a bit of a challenge in this case, since we don't have specific position descriptions for these roles. I'm also curious, considering the Oregon pay equity law, given that we have either a single incumbents or 12 individuals who are all, in the same group, would that potentially allow us to have a bit more flexibility in how we're doing this? Understanding we of course need to align with the city, but is there a bit more flexibility in how we define a language differential for this particular group, because there are no others in the city that would be in these roles?
So on I agree with you, there's no position description. I think the question that if we were to get a claim against the city, if somebody said, oh, this person's getting a pay differential and I should get one, or this person's getting paid differently, and the question is going to be, are you performing work of comparable character? And I think, and so it appears as if looking at it, potentially they would be, and I don't know for sure, and I can't say unless we got a claim against us and I looked at what is each council member, what is the work they're each doing, and is there an argument that that's not work of comparable character? Just at this point, without having those positions filled and knowing really what they look like, it's hard to answer that affirmatively. So taking a more conservative approach to that, I would say I'm going to assume at the outset that work is of comparable character. And then in order to pay differently, as Commissioner Martinez was saying, you have to fit it under one of these bona fide factors that the pay equity law allows for. And the question would be whether, where would that fall? Would it fall under experience? Is that what we're thinking of? And generally experience is defined a little bit more in the administrative rules as relating to, experience relating to the work. And so that's why we generally have tied the language pay differential to the work. And it's an interesting question, Commissioner Martinez, you asked about that. Could you consider a representation, in other words, that this person is bringing forth, that the experience they bringing forth, I think what you're saying is representative experience of a certain segment of our community, certain community members that maybe don't have much of a voice without that, or seeing themselves reflected in somebody who's able to articulate themselves in a language that they're familiar with. And honestly, I would just have to think about that for a little while, and I can't answer you tonight about it. It's an interesting thing, and I think it's worthwhile considering. Could we use that as part of experience? And then it would be a bona fide factor you could consider that would be different and would account for a pay differential. So I'm sorry, I don't have a definitive answer tonight on that, but it is a good question, and I think it's worthy of consideration.
Yeah. I also had to go through lawyers. And yes, we attach it to more than one bona fide on the list of the act. And the key again was the consistency of the criteria. I wonder also, because while we don't have job descriptions, we have a charter. And our charter, the new charter, has explicit language about the intention to increase representation from communities historically less represented. So part of my thinking is that the charter itself is setting up a value system. The charter intends to increase representation. So what are then the mechanisms through which we create and incentivize that representation? So that's one of the reasons I created the system. So wouldn't the charter description and main purpose be what is guiding instead of a job description?
Well, absolutely, the charter guides your considerations but that those would be considered within the context of the legal parameters that exist. And so, you know, I mean, if we're thinking about our intention of creating greater representation for historically underrepresented communities, which you know, is an important thing for us to consider, and for us as a city to want to reflect our elected officials within our community, and particularly those who haven't been represented historically. I think the way that the Charter Commission set up the representation by creating districts was a way to legally do so without violating equal protection laws and those things that would cause challenges for the city in being able to enforce that charter provision. And so so yes, you should consider it. We just still have to take it within the legal parameters that are required. And you know, I will say that the law currently is not great in trying to you know, repair wrongs that we've made and help increase representation where we haven't had representation historically. And you know, that we have to look at ways we can do that within this context, these legal confines that we're dealing with right now. And I'm a little concerned about you know, there's a case right now before the United States Supreme Court, the Harvard University case. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that one. And I'm worried about what the outcome of that case is going to be, given our current makeup of our US Supreme Court. And that will undermine even further our, you know, ability, to the extent we even had some small ability to, you know, based on statistical data, to be able to do some efforts at affirmative action. I worry about what's going to be left after the end of this session. So I think, yes, we need to keep that in our mind and our focus, and I appreciate that you all are doing that. And then we still have to comport within the legal requirements. So yes, and I wish our legal framework right now were what it was, you know, even 20 years ago. I think it was a lot easier for public entities to try to correct historical wrongs.
So your interpretation is that a step system for this particular kind of position based on multilingual skill sets and multicultural immersion would not meet the legal standards set by the Equity Pay Act?
I think that I'm going to take those two things separately, because I think the multilingual consideration, a pay differential based on a multilingual person's knowledge base, I think it's going to be easier for the city to find a way to tie that to an elected official's work, because I think that they will, part of their job is to interact with their constituency, and to reflect that constituency's voice within our city government. And so to me, I find it a lot easier to to make a straight-faced argument that I think is a very defensible argument about why you can provide, we as a city can provide a pay differential. The multicultural or a cultural competency pay differential becomes, I don't think it becomes difficult. I think what becomes difficult is where are the boundaries around that? I think everybody's going to be able to make an argument under the Equal Protection Clause that they qualify for a cultural competency or multicultural pay differential, and then it loses its value. It doesn't mean anything. You might as well just pay people more if that's what you want to do. And but it's across the board. I think you can have somebody claim it for being a white male. And I don't see a way to, under the Equal Protection Clause, to defend if we said, no, that's not what we're thinking of. And that's the challenge I see with that aspect of it, separate from, and that's why I divided the two up, and I wanted to take them as two separate issues.
I'm sorry, I have another question and I'll stop. Would us having in our on our report a definition of what multicultural immersion is, which is what I did at Oregon Food Bank. It's a very specific definition of 10 years or more living in immersed in a culture different from yours. So, and then there's more details, but in any case, my question is, a definition would still be considered by the city to grade a liability, to greater risk?
So if the definition were that an elected official has 10 years of immersion in a culture different from their own, here's my concern, is that with the city and districts, we're probably going to get a lot of people on different ends of the spectrum politically. And if your interest is in creating some financial value and incentivizing people who have historically been underrepresented, I am concerned that you will see that being used by a number of people that you're not intending it to be used for. And I think it would be hard for the city to decline that. So I think you could you do that and say, I mean, I guess we would have to, I think, somehow tie that multicultural immersive experience to like that's reflective somewhere in the city, right? That other multicultural, right? Like I have my own cultural experience, and then I've also immersed myself for 10 years within this other cultural experience. And so, and that within the city, there are constituents who are reflective of that other culture that I've been immersed in. I think that's certainly something that I feel more comfortable than what I had originally understood the proposal was in defending. But I do want to caution all of you that I think it's going to get, it will get used by people that maybe you're not thinking of. And I just want you to all feel comfortable that if that's what you do, that can be an outcome.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about this, so somebody, for instance, just thinking about where this could end up potentially, if somebody was in the Peace Corps for 10 years and lived in another country and had signed on for a couple of ships at the Peace Corps, and they come back to Portland, they're not a native speaker of anything but English. Would that then fall into this cultural competency, or somebody who goes and lives abroad in Sweden for 10 years, the family, and they come back. I mean, how do we, is there a way that we can, is it get too nitty gritty to try to define that down to something? I mean, when we're talking about language, one of the things that popped into my mind is whether they're a native speaker or not, because there are going to be lots of people potentially who have very strong language skills and maybe speak 2 or 3 languages, but they only have one native language. And so if we specified something that was that they were not, their native language was not English, I'm just wondering if there are any ways you can see how we could, I don't know, Commissioner Martinez, help me. Help me.
Johnson, well, I have 2 thoughts, because part of most of the work I do about equity in HR, part of the question is, oh, some people are going to abuse that, or some people are going to benefit that you were not intending, right? And I usually say, if I am 95% successful, that is a good number. So that's the first thing. The second is that, yes, multicultural immersion is the way also to not talk about race. And that is part of how, this law is incomplete, as our country is incomplete. One of our values, guiding values, is to be anti-racist. We cannot be anti-racist and also not talk about race and racism. So it's one or the other. There's no like a middle place here. So and yes, there are liabilities that the commission needs to consider, because that is a true thing, that this is a very contentious kind of society. So I'm not saying that, oh, this needs to be the way, but I am trying to figure out how the city would consider, and the way, of course, that I navigate the flaws of the law that makes it hard to achieve the spirit of the law, is that it cannot be about race. So it has to then be about experience. And the fact is that even if I am a white person from Vermont and did my Peace Corps in Sweden, like you were saying, Commissioner Johnson, that is still a multicultural immersion. And the fact is that the research, while this would not be about increased representation, multicultural immersion increases adaptability. That is such a precious skill set that I'll take it. I'll take that if that is what we get by confining ourselves to this particular criteria of how do we define multicultural immersion, even if it's porous. Because, so as everybody here knows, I'm from Puerto Rico, and I'll say 20 more things, and there's the flag and all the things. Someone who learned to speak Spanish, let's say in college, like I learned English in college, cannot fully represent my lived experience as a public servant. I need them to have that multicultural experience and not just multilingual skill sets. So that's why I'm like, I would like for those two things, like you were saying, they're separate. Because they're separate skill sets that provide for different kind of representation. And if we have to choose one over the other, then, that's what we do. And I would like to exhaust every opportunity to create a structure of pay that incentivizes multicultural immersion for a greater level of representation of a ever increasing diverse population in Portland.
Yeah, I do think that if I agree with you, Commissioner Martinez, that if you're saying like Commissioner Johnson said, and you're comfortable with, you define it as, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, immersion in a culture different from your own. And then you have to define culture. I don't know if you're talking about a different country, and defining that as well, which is a whole nother issue. But that you've come up with that, then, and as long as you're comfortable with, I think that question of you're going to have a number of people that you want to capture, and then there's going to be people that you were not thinking of, and that you're okay with them getting that pay differential as well. And that kind of was, I just want to at least say it to you, because I don't want you later to be like, Heidi, why didn't you want us? This was going to happen. So that's all it is, I feel like it's important for me to point it out. On the pay differential, Commissioner Johnson mentioned a native speaker. And I'm just, I'm trying to think about whether there'd be issues around what is, like how long you spoke that language, or how long you were in a country that only spoke that language, and think through, how are we testing for that? That one gets a little more complicated. And I think it would be if you could keep a pay differential to a certain level of competency, proficiency in some other language, other than English, so that you have you're multilingual. That would be helpful for me in defending the city, and for HR in figuring it out when it comes to time for them to try to figure out who's entitled to this pay.
Commissioner Gill?
Yeah, so I mean, I understand that you guys already have an existing policy about the language component. But the one for the multicultural, we would have to devise that on our own, or have somebody devise it. Do you have a framework of like how long it took to devise the language one? And do we have the power to create a policy such as that? Is that within our scope to do?
Barb, I'm going to ask you to answer the first question on how long it took you all to develop the pay differential. And then I don't know if Maya's here tonight or not, Jamie, but I'm less familiar with your scope, and I apologize for that. But Maya Hyam from my office is very familiar with your scope, and we could get the answer for you. I just won't necessarily have it for you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I don't really have accurate information about how long it took to develop the language pay differential policy. It was actually developed by the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and the Bureau of Human Resources implements the program in consultation with the Office of Equity and Human Rights. So HR's role is very administrative and logistical. But I would say, I mean, my understanding is that it was years of development. It was a resolution that was adopted by City Council, and the drafting of that resolution, I believe, took years.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems to me maybe if we don't have enough time to create a whole new policy, because it sounds like maybe we couldn't do that. Could we at least put something somewhere in our language or our methodology that we would like that to be examined in the future as something viable, if we can't do it now?
It could absolutely become part of your recommendations report. If you chose not to implement now, if you could spend as much time as you wanted devising all sorts of kind of like ideas, implementation strategies and recommendations in your final report.
Because it just
That-
seems to me that it's gonna take a long time to, you know, narrow down exactly what the criteria, I mean, that could be like a whole nother commission in a way, if we wanted to come up with a whole new policy like that, at least from my experience working with these kind of things. I'm just worried that we don't have enough time to do it, but I would like it to be noted somewhere that it be something that we're interested in.
And just as a reminder, there is another commission coming in 2 years, which is not that far away, but also long enough for maybe some of these questions to get answered and some, you know, some of that analysis to happen so that the next commission maybe can pick it up
Yeah.
and move the ball.
Thank you.
Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. Would it take any time at all to apply the existing policy of differential pay for multilingual skills?
I think that would dovetail into our current processes. The current process allows for a list of predetermined languages that are spoken by members of our community who have identified as lacking in English proficiency. So we sort of have a predetermined list. We have a predetermined list of jobs that are public facing. And so any employee who is in that job, who speaks that language and passes the proficiency test, a verbal test, will receive the differential. We also have another process by which an employee who speaks a language that's not in the predetermined list and or works in a job that's not on the predetermined list. There is a process by which they can request the differential, and that is approved through collaboration between BHR, Human Resources, and the Office of Equity and Human Rights on a sort of case-by-case basis. And then there's a supervisor approval that's also part of that process, and an appeal process if the supervisor has an objection. I don't think that would be relevant.
Before we move on, I just want to process time check that we are a little over time, but we did start a little early on our salary proposal conversation. So I think we still have some flexible time here, as long as Heidi is still willing to stick around for maybe another 10 minutes or so. Will that work? Thank you. Really appreciate it. Commissioner Martinez, did you have more or?
No, it's okay.
Commissioner Johnson?
A quick question on process, legal process. If we decided to implement the salary differential for multilingual speakers, is that something, what are the legal things that we'd have to think through? If we make this recommendation, we have to have some sort of practical understanding of how it would work. Would people, when they filed for to run for office, would they be tested then so that it would be transparent that they would be eligible for a higher compensation? Or how, just practically, I think we sort of need to think through, if we recommended, how it would work, because I think that's something people would ask.
I mean, from my perspective, it would make sense that if somebody is elected, that at that point, they go through that same process that Barb was describing that we already have. Because if that's what you want to adopt, it's already in existence. That's relatively easy to stand up, and it already technically exists. So really, an elected official who qualifies for that can, who wants to see if they even qualify for it, can go through that process, the testing process. It seems to me make sense that it's for employees of the city of Portland. So that would be somebody who's already elected. if you feel like the pay differential is going to be sufficient, like so much that it will influence somebody to put their name in, I'd have to think about whether there's a process to provide that testing to candidates. I think that would be the question, is what you could recommend is that testing process be made available to candidates who are running for office.
Well, if we want to attract people that might have not been able to run for office before, and they know that there is this potential, it would seem to me that we would want to test them at the point of them filing to run, rather than waiting till the end and then maybe for whatever reason not passing the test, and then feeling that it was not fair, and that also other people running would understand in the race would also understand that they wouldn't get the same salary differential. I mean, I think this is a sort of transparency issue, that it's not only it's an attractor for people to run if they feel that their language skills are valued and make them more apt to run for office. I think we'd have to try to figure out that at the beginning so that they would maybe be more apt to run.
Yeah, and then I think it would be more a question of a capacity issue for HR and the other folks that run that. And I'm not sure of that aspect of it, and would have to defer to. And I don't know if Barb, if that's even something you're aware of. Maybe Liam is, but I'm not sure.
I'm thinking capacity wouldn't be so much the issue, but I think the funding source for the testing would need to be determined, which I don't think is a problem either. And the elections office has a pool of money. I mean, I think the tests are like what, $60 or something.
I think we may be going down a bit of a rabbit hole. I just want to kind of steer us back to what I think is within the purview of this commission, which is obviously to recommend a salary number, salary range. There's some nuance there, obviously. I think it is also possible for this commission to recommend that elected officials get access to the language pay differential if you aren't going to be creating your own. It is entirely possible that in this context, what exists as a policy for a language access differential is considered a benefit of being a City of Portland employee, and therefore is not, as we've discussed before, something that this commission necessarily has the authority to require or to create, essentially. I would need to follow up with our city attorney about that specifically. And if that's the case, you can obviously put it within your report and your recommendation that you want city elected officials to have access and be able to access the language differential. But I don't know if we would be able to create our own benefits package. That is something we'll have to follow. Commissioner Cooney, I want you to go, and then I want to make sure that Heidi's been able to kind of offer all of the legal landscape thoughts about the differential pay before we move on to the rest of our agenda. Commissioner Cooney?
I think mine might be a quick clarifying question. So I'm hearing that we can consider this language differential, that obviously it exists for the city. These are elected officials. I wanted to just make sure in our consideration, we're able to consider a step system, and it doesn't mean that we have to tie to the city's differential amount. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Given that the work there, as long as the pay differential, I mean, so this is considered a pay differential, right? So part of their compensation package, we consider it like a premium pay is what the kind of the HR language that we use around this, that many of you are probably familiar with. And so as long as you're saying, for elected officials, this would be, they're on these steps, and then this would be a premium pay that would be added to that pay, to that step if they have this expertise.
And is there anything else you want to make sure that you say to the commission as they're considering this motion?
I think I've covered everything, and I think that as you're looking at these things, that there may be, like, there may be ideas that we can also move in different avenues to address. And so, I know the city has at times done things, provided some funding based on zip code, that, is, as Commissioner Martinez said, you may capture a wider net than you intended of fish, but that you are, most of the folks that you're capturing are the people that you had hoped to impact. And so I think that even if this may not be the avenue to address this particular piece of it via this, that please know that these are important things to the city, and that there are other avenues for us to work to remedy the harms over the years that have been caused, and to create that greater representation in our city. So, but I appreciate all of you and all the hard work you're doing. I really do. So.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight and answering all these questions you've given. Think about, you now have to take all of this knowledge and apply it to our conversation. Heidi, you're more than welcome to stay on if you like, but we are going to start talking about this time.
Thank you all. I'm gonna jump off, and I've got one other thing to work on tonight. So I hope you have a great night.
Thank you so much. Good
Thank
night.
you. Bye, everyone.
Liam, would you mind pulling up the slides? We're gonna get back to the conversation that we were having before about the floors and ceilings and differential pay. So we can continue the kind of conversation that you're having right now, but let's start applying it, like some direct application to the numbers that you see on the screen. And I wonder if the first question is, after that discussion, are you still considering applying a differential pay step spread to your proposal? Are there pitches for or against that we want to get out into the open?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because I know I missed last time because I was sick. So the steps would be, if they have, they test one language, they get step 1. If they have 2, they would get step 2, and 3, they would have step 3, or is it supposed to be something else?
Yeah, I think that would be up to the commission. This is just a structure.
And I believe it is more than language. It is about cultural competencies, but that is a definition that you will all have to arrive at, including some implementation recommendations. Commissioner Martinez?
If we were to be applying the structure that I'm using, it's you either have multilingual skills or you don't at a minimum professional proficiency level. So it's not if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 languages. That is about the multilingual skill sets, and particularly the skill sets that come with learning more than one language. So in folks that have the ability to speak more than one language, usually is because of more access to money. So I would say, I think that it would not be in alignment with what we're trying to do, which is to make sure that not just independently wealthy people run for office. So the way we do it is just one step for multilingual skills at minimum proficiency level. And then another step, if also they have 10 years or more in a multicultural immersion experience. So we basically, the start range is base pay and 2 more steps at maximum for those particular categories.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Cooney?
So Jamie, answering your question about whether, we are still considering steps, I know on my end, after hearing many of our wonderful speakers, I do think it's important to consider those who do speak multiple languages and were needing to use those skills in community. It felt like an important step to try to acknowledge what they're bringing to the table in those roles. So I know on my end, I think it's still worth considering.
Commissioner Akers?
Commissioner Martinez, what would the steps be? Like I see the 3% and 5% here. Is that similar to what y'all do? Or do you have like a set amount or certain percentages that you would use for the step 1 and step 2? I'd be very curious.
It's slightly different because our step system is 15 steps for many reasons. But it is an average of 4% difference between each step. So it's kind of in between these 2 recommendations. Yeah, it is. I think that if we are feeling like to go the multicultural immersion route is too risky, that at least then we make it meaningful. I think 3% difference might not be as meaningful as we need it to be in order to actually be an incentive. So I'm leaning more towards the 5% different. But in response to your question specifically, it's more an average of 4% in between the steps.
Commissioner Johnson?
Well, one of the things that seems to me that would be maybe a little more, and I'm sorry to say this, but practical would be is if instead of using a step for language is that we adopt whatever the city is using so that it's consistent with the city's premium pay. I do have some concerns about Commissioner Martinez's comment is that this could boomerang a bit, and people who have trained language skills may set themselves up for getting additional pay, and people who maybe only speak one language or are worried about passing the language test might end up feeling like they're not qualified. But if we were to tie it to what the city is doing, it seems less like a call out and more like equity to match up with what the city's already has in the way of a program and a policy and a practice that we could say we want to be consistent with that, with the proviso that in the next round of discussions on salary in 2 years, we've recognized this, but we would like to see more emphasis put on that and also on the cultural competency piece, and leave a kind of a trail for as a recommendation to be worked on down the road. But I think it would be really easy to say, without sort of sending out flares, that we want people who've gone to immersion schools and everything, that hey, we really want you more because you speak languages, is that we're just being consistent. We're valuing language, we're being consistent with what the city does with premium pay. And if people have those skills, they would go through the regular process that the city employees have, and would be given a salary differential because of it.
So I just want to paraphrase what I think I heard before opening the floor to Commissioner Gill and Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Johnson, it is your recommendation that in terms of pay differential, that the salary commission adopt or at least ask that the electeds access the language pay policy as it exists in the city of Portland now, and that you include recommendations for an expanded differential pay model in your report to the next commission.
Yes, that's correct.
Commissioner Gill?
Yeah, I would say that I fully agree with that. I think that's exactly how I'm feeling as well. So I just wanted to echo what she said.
Commissioner Martinez?
Yeah, I think that following the process as it exists right now would be a place to start. However, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood is that we can set a different differential value for these three categories, while also following the process that is already established by the city, which I also see the question online about who would conduct the fluency test would be what the city uses currently. So would we consider that?
Barb, do you want to answer that? Is that?
That's my understanding. I think I don't see why the commission would not be able to say elected officials would use the same process, but instead of using the $1 an hour differential for employees, you're going to use a 5% increase on base pay, or a 3% or any number that you consider.
Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you. I think that's what Heidi was saying earlier. That's why I was asking as well, because I do agree that having some existing approaches to establishing the language differential would make sense. I would be concerned about adopting the $1 an hour though. So if we can kind of have the best of both worlds and adopt our own method for payment, but our own payment structure, but also adopt the approach to determining when that would apply, I think that would be reasonable. So thank you.
Any other thoughts about this?
I think if we did that, I would recommend a 3%. I think the 5%, I think we need to start out getting people used to the idea of this. And I think if you start looking at the range, and I'm assuming that this would also apply then to the auditor and also the mayor, I think the 3% is a good place to start. We can always leave a recommendation going forward, but I'm not terribly in favor of the 5%.
Commissioner Sampson?
Similar to what Commissioner Cooney was saying, I think there's value in following existing policies, but I think the $1 per hour amount also indicates a system where you're tracking hours. So I don't know if that's true and if it's used pretty heavily amongst your hourly staff, and if you have like a process in place to apply that differential by hour worked versus a percentage. But it seems like at least knowing the systems we use at our work, a percentage could potentially be easier for implementation and allow us to pay something that's more appropriate with their pay rate and not just an annual rate of $2,080, as Commissioner Angers pointed out. So I'm on the same page as Commissioner Cooney to evaluate what that percentage should be, but follow some existing policies.
So it sounds like we are coming to some agreement amongst the commission about a recommendation to move forward a language pay differential attached to the current policy of the city of Portland, but with a percentage increase instead of the dollar increase. And the question getting messages that the audio has been lost.
Yes. Just when you got to the good part.
It's okay. It sounds like it's back. Okay, I'm gonna repeat. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. So it sounds like we're coming to a general agreement amongst the commission that the idea is to agree to move forward a language pay differential proposal that is attached to the City of Portland policy in terms of implementation, but is different in terms of a percentage recommendation instead of the $1 increase as currently exists in the City of Portland. To set aside the cultural competency pay differential conversation to be maybe discussed more and included in the recommendations report. And so that the conversation now is really starting to gel around what is the base pay that you want and what is the percentage increase that you want to attach to the language differential. Does that capture general consensus on this commission? Does anyone disagree strongly with what I just said or want to make any corrections or oppose that approach? Not seeing any hands. Same page. Excellent. We are moving in the direction. Okay. So now the question is, what is the base pay? At the last meeting, you all set your floor rate for council, and that's reflected on the screen at 142,404. Unless I hear otherwise, I'm assuming that remains the base salary for council. Is there any discussion about changing? Not seeing any. So then the question is, based on that floor rate and the numbers that Barb has provided in terms of kind of the percentage spread between, mayor and auditor, are the base pay amounts that you see on your screen what you would like to propose, or is there a different number or different approach you would like to take to determine this? I'm not following the chat, but there's a bunch in there. Can someone say out loud what you wanted to say?
I see on the chat that we are mostly on the same page. I don't see anything about any disagreement on base pay. Commissioner Inger said, how about meeting at the middle instead of 3 or 5 for %? My preference would be if the commission considers 4% because I want that to be a meaningful increase in pay, enough to create an incentive. And I don't know if 3% does it. However, I wouldn't block it. I think this is way better than what we have right now in so many ways. But I would like for that step to be a meaningful step, enough to be an incentive for greater representation.
Commissioner Cooney?
So I just have a question for the group, and I don't have an opinion on this either way just yet. So looking at the step system, do we have any concerns about where people might land if they did have a step added? So if an auditor had a step, went to step 1, they potentially would end up at a higher salary range than the mayor. Is that anything we're concerned about, or is that not a concern because it's honoring our, our values? So wouldn't be a problem. That's
At step 1, the auditor would still make less than the mayor's base pay. Am I reading that correctly? Or you're saying it would be higher? We only have one step so far identified for language, as far as I understand it. So there's base.
For the
stepping-
3%, that's right. For the 5%, it would be above
Right.
the mayor, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So the question is, does anyone on the commission have any concern about that? Is that something you consider?
Commissioner Engers, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was honestly surprised that and I know this is based on multiple other cities, but that the auditor's pay was lower than the mayor's. That was one thing that immediately was an area of question for me.
Did you want to speak to that, Myra, or?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are the numbers. I don't know. Don't know. How to speak to that. I mean, I don't know if that's, you know, a value in our culture. In general, you know, the mayor is more important than the auditor.
I'm speculating here, but I think the auditor oversees a smaller department, like a singular kind of department. And while the mayor in this form of government oversees the entire city structure, that could be why. I obviously don't have any expertise on that either. Commissioner Gill?
Yeah, just saying that I do not have a concern that the auditor might make more than the mayor. I don't think that it's a negligible difference there, and I would be okay with the 4%.
Sounds like we're coming to agreement on 4% unless somebody speaks up and offers a difference.
I think 4% sounds good. And just like a quick calculation, it looks like at 4%, if there was a scenario where the auditor was at step 1, they would be at 175,508. So it does shorten or make that gap smaller. So they would be pretty much right at the mayor's salary.
So it sounds we're coming to agreement on the percentage, going swimmingly. What we haven't fully decided on is the base pay for mayor and auditor. Let's start with this. Do you still have questions or concerns about the analysis used to reach these numbers? Juanita's not on. I'm gonna give it another minute. Commissioner Martinez agrees.
I just have one quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
When if I understand this model correctly, what we did is rather than looking at an average salary for the mayor and the auditor based on market data, we took the market data and looked at the difference between essentially the positions. And then these salaries came up based on a percentage between the positions in the market. The only concern I would have for that is that because there's so much disparity between what may be going on within other cities, similar comparable organizations, is using the percentage difference, which is what this reflects between the council and the auditor and the mayor. Is that the best and valid way to do it, or should we be going back and looking at the averages in the market rather than tying them to a percentage between the different jobs? And what does that look like?
Just to reflect the reason this approach was taken, it was a specific request
Mm-hmm.
from Commissioner Martinez to look at that. It wasn't necessarily like this has to be the answer, just
Right,
an interest in understanding what that would look like.
right. I understand that. I'm just wondering if we then go back though and look at it, rather than saying that the council position is sort of the governing factor in terms of percentage for the mayor and the auditor. Could we go back and look at what the average is for the council is fine, I mean, that, but could we look at the auditor and the mayor salaries? What are they tied to besides a percentage differential between the other two positions? I'm just curious if we have to kind of come up with a final base pay, is there a big difference? Are these numbers lower, higher? Are they roughly the same?
I don't have the slide in front of me. That's a great question, but I do have the numbers because I wrote them down. I forgot them.
I don't
I have
care.
notes on my phone. So the numbers for mayor, the average like market rate salary was sitting at 177.8,
Mhm.
177,800. And the auditor was at 161.
Okay. Close enough.
Commissioner Sampson?
That's essentially what I was going to say. I was looking back at the market averages as well. On the auditor, the average for the pay ranges was 166.7, and then the 161.8 was the actual incumbent pay average. So I was going to comment that these numbers do seem to line up pretty closely to market. And I know that we don't want to rely on just one source or one formula or one way to get there, but it is nice when things tend to align pretty well. So I just wanted to like point that out, that these numbers are very close to what we were looking at. And then the council range, we obviously made an intentional decision to not base that on market data and to instead base it on a thriving wage. And that thriving wage is just above what the city of Portland would have been had COLA been kept up on. So I think in all three categories, things are lining up pretty well.
Good.
Pausing a minute, because it sounds like what we're getting to is these base pay numbers on your screen. Commissioner Gill, good, base pay numbers are good. Seeing agreed, I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm getting so excited. We have not explored the conversation of a salary range. It sounds like that's not something that's coming up or of interest. So maybe we, no ceilings. I'm seeing head shaking ceilings. Okay. But we have our floors and we have a 4% step. We have one step for language differential set at 4%, which we don't have those numbers on our screen, but we can do some quick calculation to make that happen. Is this for real? Pinch ourselves, right? Are we there? I'm looking in the room. I'm looking at faces. Commissioner Johnson.
Quick question. Maybe we're going to get to this, but I wanted to just ask now since we're kind of in the thick of it. Could we put in a recommendation in here that the salaries track with the non-represented COLAs in year 2? Because there'll be 2 years on this plan before there's another commission. So can we put that in there so that these are not the same, they get a raise in the second year that's consistent with the city's COLA?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely doable. And I also should say that tomorrow council is voting to apply a 5% COLA increase to non-represented employee pay effective July 1st, 2023. So if the commission chooses, you could choose to apply the 5% COLA that is likely coming tomorrow, plus whatever COLA is applied on July 1st, 2024. Just the
Well, since it's halfway, this doesn't take effect until January. It would be just the second half of the year before the next salary increase. I just don't want to see them sit there for 2 years without any kind of a rational way for them to have salary increases. But I don't know that we need to give them the 5% now because they won't even take office for a year and a half. So that's neither here nor there, but I do want to have a language in there that ties the increase to the second year to the, or I propose that we put language in there that ties to the non-rep COLA. These numbers now track with our best of our knowledge at the moment with the current market data. So I don't know if anybody wants to mess with those again and add a 5%. I don't know.
Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you so much for bringing that point. Because this data is based on past data and it doesn't have a COLA. And if this is going to start in January of 24, I think that we would be eroding our own goals if we don't apply the COLA. So I would propose for us to consider that this is the best base pay for current numbers, but then that consider applying a 5% now so that it starts at the level of COLA for the rest of the non-represented city employees.
These pays don't take effect until 2025, just for
Right.
information.
2 years, yeah.
Year and a half, yeah.
This needs to have at least a 5%.
So it seems like if you're trying to consider a 5% COLA now, or anticipating that COLAs will be applied to future salaries, it sounds like you want to apply that's 5% to the base pay now. So everything would get moved up 5% as your proposal. Is that what you're offering? Commissioner Martinez says yes. Seeing thumbs up. So these aren't our base pay. This is our base pay minus 5%. We would add 5%. Then we would include a language differential step that would add 4%. Is that what you're offering? I see Shoshana Oppenheim, our project manager, has her hand up.
Hi, folks. I just wanted to give you a little bit more information that the next salary commission will be impaneled in January of 2025. So there will be another salary commission the year of 2025. Just wanted to make sure you had that at top of mind for this conversation.
Thank you, super helpful, because it's 2 years starting from when you started, apparently. So it's coming fast. I mean, with that information, then, do you still want to apply a 5% additional amount now? Or do you want to leave for the next salary commission to consider?
I just want to clarify on that. So you're saying we could advance these by 5% now, and then in our recommendation, say maintain COLA consistent with non-represented employees for July 1st, 2024. And like advancing them by 5% now would mean that we would not say to match COLA for July 1st, 2023. Like it would just be us doing it a couple weeks early.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Did somebody else understand it? I'm sorry. Commissioner, did you understand?
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that we're sort of just a couple of weeks away from being into our new non-represented pay increases that are all increasing by 5%. And this data is from, several months ago, and most public, I shouldn't say most, but many public organizations do begin their fiscal year in the January or July 1st. So by applying the 5% now, you're essentially bringing the salaries into alignment with current non-represented pay just a few weeks early. And in fact, by the time this commission disbands, that COLA increase would have been applied to non-represented employees.
Right. Okay. I guess in my mind, it was like, do we just continue with these numbers and say, however, anytime non-represented until the next salary commission is in place, that COLA will follow what non-representeds get, and that would cover the upcoming COLA and July 1st, 2024, assuming that there's a COLA the following year. But I think what we're saying is because that's coming so soon for non-represented, that we could incorporate 5% now and acknowledge that in our report to say like what numbers we started at and why we added that 5% on. And then we would also need to decide if we want to write language to say also bring those salaries up if July 1st, 2024, there's a COLA, because that would be before the next salary commission. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you just have a strange timing issue right now. Yeah, we experience that when we hire or promote employees. So, if they're getting the job offer, June 20th, but their effective date will be July 2nd, then we add to their pay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Angers?
I agree with Commissioner Sampson's approach to it. And I would say, just in case the number doesn't end up being 5%, that maybe we just say we are going to follow the COLA versus saying 5% for this first one. It's only going to be a couple weeks, like we'll know the answer, but just as we're talking about it, and I think it does make sense to reflect what the future will bring versus relying only on past data.
So how would we like that to be reflected in the proposal that you're about to launch into the public? Would it be, these are the base pay numbers with a language step increase, plus the potential for 2023 COLA and 2024 COLA? I don't know if we would put potential numbers to that if we don't know if it's going to be 5% or not. We would just say that these numbers set today would track with any additional COLA approved by council moving forward for non-represented employees, instead of applying the 5% now, just to avoid the discrepancy if it's not that number that they end up approving.
And it would track in July of the second year of the new council. So if the new council starts in January 2025, whatever increase that the non-reps get in July of 2025 and 2026, going forward after this is after we have people seated in these positions. So not just between now and when they are seated, which is what we're talking about, but I would want to make sure that we have language that speaks to them getting the COLA after they're seated for the 2 years before the commission puts in another recommendation, which wouldn't be effective then another year. So
Okay. And just so I'm clear on the rationale, I see a couple hands raised. the rationale is these numbers, these base pay numbers are established based on kind of cost of living now, right? The numbers that, we are anticipating cost of living in this current base pay, but recognizing that cost of living increases, and that increase is reflected in City of Portland employees' pay, and therefore should also be reflected in the elected officials' pay. Is that the right rationale? I'm asking because we're going to be drafting this proposal in the report. Language makes sense. Commissioner Martinez?
So I thought that we knew it was gonna be 5%, but it sounds now like we won't be sure. And I'm wondering, when would we be sure?
My understanding is that the vote is tomorrow. So we should know tomorrow if it's the 5%. And maybe Shoshana can confirm that.
Okay, but for vote purposes, Jimmy, what I hear you say is it would be the same if we just decide this is our recommendation based on 2023 data. And a COLA, according to, non-represented city employees shall be applied each year.
Yeah, and in terms of the proposal, that's the language you can set out. But by the time this gets back to you for an official decision, at the end of July, you could very well just go ahead and apply the 5% or whatever the council decided to and make your final vote. So, but in terms of like communicating to the city and like explaining what you're doing, it might make more sense to say any COLA, decided by council between now and then. And then you can have that rationale discussion on public record in July and apply it. Any other discussion about this? Feel like we're on the same page. This is base pay with one step at 4% based on the language differential, with COLA being applied every year that council decided. Moving forward between now and until the next commission decides. Okay, this is very exciting. I think we're even on time. Would you mind advancing this slide really quick? This last conversation, I'm not sure if there's a place for this conversation at this point in time. But there was certainly the request to explore whether or not the Salary Commission had the authority to create kind of conditional pay structure recommendation. From everything I can gather, it was a little difficult to get a very clear answer from the city attorneys. I take full blame for that. I think it was probably the way in which I was phrasing it. But my understanding is that you would have the authority to do such a thing. Again, this would be like, we recommend this particular salary if the city decides that there's going to be this number of staff or decides on, this particular thing. I will note that I put duties of council president here more as kind of a thing to trigger my memory, that we had promised you to bring kind of a recommendation about council president's roles and responsibilities. It has come to our attention that it is going to be recommended that there not be any kind of pay recommendation for council president, because that's not how it happens in other cities. There's no other cities that we've been able to find that pay their council president differently. And those roles and responsibilities, I don't think have quite been drafted yet. There's an official memo that's going to be created and sent to you all. It just wasn't done in time for tonight. So I don't have more language or more information for you about that. But if this is a thing that you really want to continue to consider, it may be something that we have to bring back to your table July 20th after our engagement opportunity for the next week. thoughts, Commissioner Martinez?
Yeah, I mean, considering that we have time still to, consider this question. I have a concern about making a conditional proposal because it might unintentionally erode our rationale for how come we arrived to this particular numbers. So for example, we're saying, well, this is the value. These are the differences in value. These are a thriving, this is a thriving wage, and we need our public officials to have financial stability to do the work we need them to do. That if we have that be conditional to, well, if you want more staffing, then you can have a lower wage, then I'm concerned of that inadvertently ending in an erosion of the perception of our rationale.
Commissioner Johnson?
I agree with Commissioner Martinez, and I think that this kind of comes under the heading of maybe the next commission, once the offices are set up and the duties are clear about how council members are organizing their work, that maybe the next commission might want to look at some of these things. But I agree. I think we've worked really hard to have a really clear, clean structure, and I think this starts to get into the weeds on things that we have really no control over. It doesn't mean we can't make good recommendations going forward, but I don't know that we should put them into the pay structure.
Same nods. Anyone else have a different opinion? Seeing some agreement in the chat. Commissioner Johnson, you still have your hand up. Did you want to say
Oh,
something?
I'm sorry. No, I'm done. Sorry.
Okay, it looks same Z's. I'm seeing agreement, which means that you have all earned yourself a 5-minute break. That's where we are at in the agenda. Wonderful work, everybody. Congratulate yourself, please. Would you mind advancing this slide? I encourage you all to turn off your screens, take a break, stretch your legs, do whatever you need to do. We will do the same here. Let's reconvene at 8:08 because it will probably start at 8:02. Does that work for everyone? All right. See you soon. I'll just leave that. Yes. Yeah, sure. Well, this is what he says, but. Right. Oh, please don't be sorry. I totally understand. We all have those moments. And I do. Maybe just heard us talking. We need to advance. All right. I'm gonna talk slowly and gently and welcome you back into the space. Your well-deserved break. Look for screens to come back on. Happy, shiny, bright faces. Welcome back, Commissioner Hill and Sampson. And Amy. You don't want to turn on your screen, that's cool too, but if you give me a thumbs up that you're in the room. The conversation. Commissioner Johnson. Okay. Commissioner Angers, welcome. All right. We are back in business, y'all. So the last half of our meeting today, or gosh, the last third, I guess, of our meeting is to finalize all of your communication materials and your engagement, community engagement, because we are about to launch this amazing proposal that you put together. And I want to, before we begin, introduce, let's make sure they are in the room. It wants them to film this, but I'm not seeing them. So let me try again. Go to panelist. Okay. We have Francisca Garcia. And we should have Christine Lopicott also in the room. These are our communication professionals on the transition team. Francisca and Christine, can you say hello if you have been successfully joined?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us tonight.
Yeah. I'm not seeing Christine. Daniel has his hand up. Daniel? Daniel, I'm going to promote you to panelist C. Daniel, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Christine. Daniel is our communications manager, everyone, for the transition team. All three of these folks have been working really hard to draft these materials for you. They've been watching tonight to better understand your proposal. Because what we need to do now is take the draft report as you have seen it and kind of walk through some live editing with you and also have a discussion about how we are going to build in that proposal part of the report that you probably noticed is blank because we didn't have a proposal to enter in there. So they're going to be working with us to understand all of your kind of edits to these various pieces and all of your decisions around engagement, and then help us launch all of this into the community this week. So I think the best way to probably do this, we sent you all of these materials ahead of time, so hopefully you had a chance to review them and look them over. What I think we're going to do is pull down this presentation, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to go through each of these materials a little bit at a time. So we'll start with the draft report, and then go over the draft survey, and so on. Does anyone have any kind of concern with this approach? Any questions before we get started? The communications team will be here to help us make sure that, you know, we're doing this properly, help answer any questions about what's possible, and just to better understand the edits that we want to see. Okay. So would you please pull down the presentation? Liam, thank you so much. I'm now going to figure out how to share report. Here we go. The template that I sent to you all was a beautifully formatted
Sorry.
that Francisco put together. But what I'm showing you on the screen right now is really just a Word document so that we can kind of go over and make edits because the PDF isn't editable. So I guess I just want to start right here at the beginning and open it up for any comments, concerns, recommended edits on page. I'm gonna call this page 1, but I don't think it is. I will note that there is, under July 2023, we've got to fix this language. What it's intended to say is that there will be extended public comment opportunity. We just kind of worded it weirdly. Looking for hands, I'm not seeing any. Choose with this page. Commissioner Martinez?
Yeah, about the paragraph under ISC's authority, it still has the majority vote process. Do we want to talk about this to 5 or leave it? I don't know, just it's not in alignment with our practices. I just wanted to highlight. Well, the charter mandates that it has to reach a simple majority of 3. You have determined a different process. I think what we were reflecting was the charter language. Would you prefer to include, because this is just about what the ISC's authority is, it's kind of like set on charter, but we could include VISTA 5 language in addition. I think that it be in the spirit of transparency for the public to also know our process and how we have valued consensus. But this is not the hill. This is not the hill.
It is in the values section. It does mention, I read it somewhere, I think under values, that we use the VISTA 5 as part of our values. Down further into the report. Isn't that in there somewhere? I'm pretty sure I saw it.
I don't know, I'd have to go look at it.
Yeah, I think it's in under values when we talk about our process and values. It is listed in.
Oh, in this report here?
Yeah.
It's,
I read it.
It's also in the fact sheet, by the way, that we will.
Yeah.
A specific description about VISTA 5 is in that other material as well.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's in here as well already?
I think I read it in here when it talked about how our kind of our methodology and our values, what we were valuing. I know I've seen it. So, because I thought it was great. You got it in there somewhere.
It might have been in the fact sheet, but okay, so let's keep going. Is there any, I'm going to take this a section at a time just to make this easier. So I heard feedback about, sorry, my screen's all over the place. The ISC's authority. Sounds like if possible, it'd be nice to include language about VISTA 5 if it's not already elsewhere. Are there any additional comments or concerns about commission timeline? I'm going to kind of move through this pretty quickly. So if you have anything, you're going to need to speak up. How salaries are determined. This is where we try to outline what your guiding principles are and your criteria. So it's pretty straightforward. It's obviously just, specifically what your guiding principles are. We should probably have a conversation about this section of your criteria. The way in which it was previously worded is a little funky in terms of kind of communicating out to community. I think we understood clearly what we were talking about. You understood clearly what you were putting together when you created it. But there's been some recommendation to kind of make this more readable and understandable. And it's not quite reflected here, but I want to walk you through it. And another recommendation I want to make is to remove this language methodology and just say criteria, because the methodology is the entire process that you identified, including your guiding principles and these particular criteria points. That's the methodology. But the recommendation is to break this up into 3 different bullet points. So this first one would be the Salary Commission recognizes that for pay to be anti-oppressive, it must embrace pay concepts that depart from the total reliance on market pay. That would be a standalone sentence. Then the next criteria would be this. So while the commission will still consider market pay data, including, and then these items, we recognize that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive. And
Should
then,
is that a sentence? Should that be a capital W? We recognize, is that a bullet or a sentence or?
no, it would be, while the commission will still consider market pay data, including this, and a thriving wage in the city of Portland for a single parent of one child, comma, we recognize that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive. Is there a better way to make this more readable, Commissioner Angers?
Yeah, so I think actually the first bullet, the salary commission recognizes that for paid to be anti-oppressive should actually be at the end of that sentence. And so maybe it would just be the ISC's methodology will consider bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. And then flipping that last, the first bullet about the salary commission and the anti-oppressive pay to the last, because that's really what it's talking about.
So moving this bullet point as the last thing under here.
No, the last sentence, make it a sentence instead of a bullet under, we recognize that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive. And then rewording it a little bit, but like recognizing that for pay to be anti-oppressive, like it's not really a separate concept. Like that is the concept. It's like, these are the things that we're considering, but we realize that for pay to be anti-oppressive, we can't rely only on market.
Okay, so the idea would be to make sure that these two are connected. Would you be like these two concepts are meant to go together?
They're the same. Yeah, they're the same concept.
Okay. Would you be?
Then,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna say, it's really just. Yes, I can rewrite it if everyone's comfortable with that. I think they're just like flipped.
Yes. Do you want to rewrite it, or are you?
I'm happy to let you rewrite it if you'd like to. But the idea of like, these are what we're considering, but we're not only considering this because we're also using an anti-oppressive pay lens.
Daniel, do you or anyone else have a question about what the recommendation is?
No, I think what I'm hearing, we're going to start that section with, we recognize that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive, period. The ISC's criteria is colon, bullet, bullet, bullet. Is that what I'm hearing from Commissioner Engers?
Sort of. Yes, a little bit. Maybe like we're considering market pay, but we realize that to be anti-oppressive, we cannot only consider market pay. Because it's kind of split into thirds right now, if that makes sense. Like it's like, to be anti-oppressive, we will not only consider market pay. Here's the market pay that we're considering, but it's not conclusive. Like it kind of makes sense, but I think it'd be a little clearer if it was like this is market pay, but we're not only considering market pay.
Commissioner Angers, would you be willing to maybe mock something up and put it in the chat, and we can move on and then come back to it when you have an example for us to input?
I can, Commissioner Cooney, I see your hand in case there's anything about this.
Yeah, I just was wondering, I agree with you. I think we do need to kind of move things around. I'm wondering if we need to move, because the important part there is that we recognize that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive. Can we move that up and just, almost have that be its own sentence and say, while the commission, or maybe we just say, while the commission recognizes that market pay is only instructive and not conclusive, we will still consider market pay data, something like that. But yeah, I think it's a little too separated, and I agree with you that it needs to tie to that first concept somehow. So still acknowledging that we're using market pay data, but not overly relying on that as our sole source of data.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, in that first bullet, we say the current wages of elected officials with fiscal year 23-24 COLA adjustments added. So we just had a discussion about whether we wanted to add that. We've just got it in the bullet. I don't know whether we mean there fiscal year 22-23, because 23-24 must be that must be the 5% that's going to be voted on tomorrow. So we've just said we're going to add it in there, so we might as well put the 5% in.
Or we could just do this.
Yes. Or we could, or you could.
One more question before I'm gonna move on and empower Commissioner Angers to come up with some draft language. This last paragraph here was part of this whole package. Does it need to sit separately? Also, it was suggested to us that we should also include language here about how the charter denies elected officials' ability to have outside pay. I don't have the language specific in mind, but that should be included in your criteria because it was a very specific part of your discussion. And it also comes up a lot from people who are kind of participating and listening in, that they don't know if you know that and if you considered it. And so it would be, I think, really helpful to make sure it's embedded in your criteria so everyone knows that you were, that was deeply considered. I see some thumbs up, clap hands, great, okay. We will include that language. I'm gonna keep it moving and look for Commissioner Angers' suggestions a little bit. So the next section is about the metrics used to determine criteria. We had a conversation about making sure that folks knew that all of the data that you considered attached to your values, even the ones that you did not necessarily include in your final criteria. So that's why it's listed here as the metrics that were included and the metrics that weren't included. All of that, all of those metrics are part of the appendices. So they have all of that data to look at. Are there any questions or concerns about this one? This is some information about how to comment on the draft proposal. We're going to go over the survey, but we'll attach it here. These dates have not been fully decided. That's something that we will also discuss tonight. And we'll make changes as needed. Are there any suggested changes for this section? Not seeing any, but I am seeing that there is a chat with suggested language that says the ISC considers market pay data, including bullet. However, we recognize that pay to be anti-oppressive, it must embrace pay concepts that the Department of Labor relates to everything. I guess I don't have to read this out loud because you can all see it in the chat. Does everyone agree with that language as proposed by Commissioner Angers?
I do agree with the language. I'm just noticing that in most areas of the report, it's, the ISC and they, and then this has we as the wording. So I don't know which is used more, but just making sure the report is consistent one way or the other.
Commissioner Sampson, that is a really good point, and that was also a suggested edit that I forgot about to tell you that that is inconsistent. Would you prefer it to be kind of like the first person we, or would you prefer it to say salary commission? I'm not a grammar expert, so I'm not sure I said it. Do you even get what I'm saying? We sounds more transparent. Does everyone agree with that? Speaking in terms of the IS, we decided. We as the salary commission. Not hearing any no's. So it looks like that's what we will go with. I want to keep it moving. Sorry, everyone. The reason we have to do this is because we didn't establish any work groups to go through this stuff. So we have to do this. Okay, so this is the blank part of the draft salary proposal. I think I have a good idea of what we've decided, but does anyone have any suggestions they want to make sure is logged, is on public record for how we construct this particular section?
The only suggestion I would make is that when you redo the chart and show the pay differential for language proficient or second language proficiency or multi-language proficiency, we make it clear in the heading what the salary differential, what that second level is for, so people don't see it as some other kind of a raise, or, you know, it's somebody gets this and somebody gets that, that it's very clearly delineated in the heading of that column.
Noted. Any other recommendations? Okay, and then we get to the appendix. And this is
I'm sorry, I
Commissioner-
raised my hand about language, just a parking lot of language about the COLA. And also language from the existing process, city process, to determine the proficiency level to qualify for the step.
Got it. So now we're in the appendices that include all of the charts and tables that you all use so people can see them. I don't need, we need to go through all of them. These were literally everything that you contemplated in your meetings. I do want to ask Francisca, and Daniel, if there was anything else you needed from this part of it. That there were some outstanding questions perhaps. I'm not seeing or hearing anything. Commissioner Johnson?
Just a quick question. So in this chart, it shows the COLA plus the benefits, and we should probably put, we should have, if we hadn't, put 50% in addition to base. Do we need to put that anywhere in our regular proposal, since we do speak here to what the benefit portion is in addition to for the total compensation to the base?
I don't think I understood your suggestion, Commissioner Johnson.
Okay. So here in this particular appendix, this was the chart that shows the total compensation in the third column, COLA benefits applied. I think we don't have to go back. I don't think people are going to understand what the benefits, what that means. It means that it's 50% on to the base salary in order to get to the total compensation number. So it's when you add the benefits. Do we somewhere in our pay proposal need to show what our proposed salary will be with the benefits applied? Just a question, I don't have an answer. Because we talk about it here, but we don't refer to it in the main salary proposal. We didn't really talk about what that number would look like. So I guess, Barb, it's maybe a question for you. Do we need to have some chart that shows the total compensation with the 50% benefit number in there?
Yeah, I think it's up to you. We can certainly, for this chart, we could add a little definition about what that final column means, that instead of saying plus benefits applied, we could say something like, in parentheses, reflect the cost of benefits equals 50% of base salary or something like that. Like we could be a little bit more descriptive for that final column, but in terms of creating your final salary schedule and duplicating it in this way, by adding benefits in. I don't know, I guess that would be up to you. If you wanted to do that, it's go down and do that.
Is that a yes?
I, just my opinion, I would lean towards not including it. I think we looked at it in the beginning because we were curious what that number looked like, but we didn't look at this at other agencies when we went out to look at the market data. So I don't think we really stuck with it and went far enough to say what it's providing. So I would prefer to stick to just the base salaries. And I think it could, even if we put a disclaimer, become a little bit confusing to the public.
Commissioner Johnson, do you have more to say? Is your hand still up?
No, I
Nope.
truly was just asking a question. I didn't have
Okay.
any. I'm
Okay.
looking to go with what other people, I really would like to know what other people think, that's all.
Sounds like we're gonna leave it as is, not apply the benefits to the base proposal. This is, I'm looking at the time, it's 8:30, and this is taking a little longer than I anticipated. So I'm gonna switch to the survey really quick. Assuming everyone's okay with this report, and if you want to add more comments, please do so in the chat. We will obviously log them and note them. I'm going to do a quick overview of the survey, and assuming everyone's cool with it, we're going to keep moving forward. We worked with your co-chairs to create this survey. So the idea is that with these demographic questions is that we would really like to identify folks who are kind of contributing their feedback to your salary proposal in order to kind of best apply an analysis about who we're hearing from and what their preferences are in terms of salary. This really supports your value of trying to motivate candidates from diverse backgrounds and who are historically marginalized. And so these demographic questions really reflect the populations that you were looking to encourage into office. This particular language is taken straight from the living versus thriving wage metrics in order to better connect that work. And then a kind of current salary range. And then the rest of the questions about the proposal are not about, you know, do you like this amount? Do you want more? Do you want less? They're really very directly connected to your guiding principles and asking whether or not the community agrees that your recommendations reflect those guiding principles accurately. Commissioner Martinez or Commissioner Cooney, is there anything else you want to say to this survey?
I think that what I would want to highlight about this, the purpose of the survey is to make sure we collect data that we aim to use. So it's not lip service. That we are asking folks for meaningful and useful feedback. So what I'm hoping is to then get feedback specifically to how what we decided or what we are recommending rather in their view meets our guiding principles. So that if we get feedback that says, you know, you're super off on this because of X, Y, you know, reason, that would be then information that would be then it would bring us back to the drawing table. So I think that those are the two aspects I want to highlight, that we want to make sure that the data is data that would actually influence, and data that is not only meaningful, but also influence our decision. I'm not Englishing very well tonight. It's past 8.
And I apologize, this whole time I was talking, I thought you were seeing the survey on your screen, and I was like walking through it as if you could see what I was talking about. So sorry about that. Commissioner Sampson.
I was looking at question 3, and I know that I think these are pulled from the thriving wage information we looked at, but we might need to add another category that's like not represented. I'm thinking of like retired households, because the whole, like most of them represent part of the household working, except for the top portion, but the top portion is only for one adult and is focused on dependents. So I think that there could be some groups that aren't listed, and maybe we don't need to list them all out, but
an other category with a parentheses about like retired or other situation not listed might be helpful.
I definitely think retired should go on there.
What is the value of adding retired? Or do you want just other so people can put insert what they want?
Because from my perspective, I mean, people who are retired, they're not, if they're retired, they're not working. And I think it's important to call out, it's a group of people in Portland who are going to have an opinion. And I think if we don't, again, for transparency, let's ask them. I mean, if retirees are, there are retired people here, and I do think we should include them, even though they're not in the living and thriving categories. I think other doesn't really speak to it, and I think we should give them the courtesy of naming them.
Oh, I see what you're saying, because there's no, that makes sense. Yeah, sorry, I was a little confused. That makes sense that they wouldn't be able to answer any of these, and so we need to give them.
And they also vote.
Commissioner Cooney, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you. Echoing Commissioner Johnson's, because this is more of a demographic question. It makes people not finish the survey where they don't see themselves represented. So just echoing. Thank you.
Makes sense. Commissioner Cooney?
Really good catch. And I'm just wondering if we want to be as specific as retired, or if we also want to just have something that indicates not working, because yeah, it looks like we do have folks listed with either working and dependents. And you may have already been saying this, so sorry, my brain's getting a little tired at this point. But yeah, I just want to make sure we're capturing people in case we have folks who are responding who are not currently employed. So
that makes sense.
Not working and retired are two different things. So we would need to add both.
okay, got it. It's true.
Commissioner Medras?
So for gathering all of this demographic data and the specifics will then help us understand where they're coming from, where their feedback is, and determine whether or not we need to shift our recommendation. I think that will be helpful as long as it is alongside the demographic data writ large in Portland, because this is going to be such a specific subset of folks who are super interested in the charter and wanting to provide insight on this particular question. And so I would just suggest that as we collect all of this data, it's going to be incredibly insightful for us to then review and incorporate, but then have that be alongside the kind of public data around like the average wage for all Portlanders and the average household stuff that we already have, just so it's both and not the particular subset of those who fill out the survey.
Thank you. Any other things to talk about for the survey? Okay, I'm gonna skedaddle us through the other comms materials. Is everyone okay with that? No, Commissioner Ingers? I see a face.
I didn't get a chance to read the whole survey, so I don't know. Is it included in the materials? I haven't seen it yet. I looked at all the other things, but I did not see this.
Yes, it was included in the materials, but it was included as a link and not as an attachment, but it was a link in the agenda that I sent. So it might have gotten overlooked.
It definitely did.
Feel free to look it over and provide your feedback anytime by the end of the day or evening tomorrow, because that's when we're making kind of final edits to all this stuff, moving it through kind of final sign off to launch on Friday. So I'm going to be pretty picky about what we look at next, because you all have these materials in your inboxes, hopefully had a chance to look at them. So what I'm gonna suggest at this point is that you send me your recommended edits tomorrow, if you have any. Some of this stuff has already been vetted a lot. So for example, the fact sheet that I provided for you is something that has gone through kind of multiple edits and lots of rounds, and it's kind of the one pager that we use on the transition team to describe the salary commission work. So hopefully you don't see anything major there. And I guess maybe what I will do at this point, because we're gonna have to talk about engagement, is open it up kind of more broadly to anyone who has a particular burning concern or question about any of the comms materials as you have had the chance to review them or not, or has a special request to look at something in particular that you received, just in the interest of time. There is, I'm not seeing anything. There is one more piece of comms material that we got today that I will send out to you all. And I just want to kind of highlight for you really quickly because I'm very excited about it. And Francisca did an amazing job. So let me see if I can pull it up here. So Francisca put together a number of social media posts and graphics to advertise your proposal and your upcoming hearing. So obviously some of this is still waiting for your final decisions, but this is what your information will look like. We'll insert numbers there. So this is the type of material that will be put out on the comms channel, social media channels. We're getting some quotes from some of your guest speakers who came to your meetings, so that some of their very profound words can be shared. We're sharing the values that you are establishing, why you're setting your salaries to make it possible for different people to run. Again, I'll share these out for you if you have any particular questions or concerns about the language or anything like that. It's to encourage people to come to your listening session. This is to, more specific information about the thriving wage and why, the purpose behind the thriving wage and allowing court workers to afford to choose to run for office. More of that. And then, that you're going to join the IDC, which is the decisions that we need to make now about your next engagement opportunity. Okay. Liam, would you mind pulling the presentation back up? Okay, so engagement looks like tonight, you're basically on public record with your proposal. So there may be media that's interested in talking about this sooner rather than later. We anticipate not being ready to release your draft report and survey until Friday morning because of the kind of editing and finalizing we need to go through. There's still a bunch to write tomorrow morning, a bunch of edits we need to make that we discussed tonight. That's going to get shared with co-chairs to make sure the final, language is correct. Then it'll go through some internal review and editing before it launches Friday morning. In the meantime, it's certainly possible that the media will be getting in touch with us to want to have a conversation. We've identified a spokesperson for this particular round, and that's Commissioner Angers. We talked to the co-chairs about this recommendation. That's who they felt would be the most appropriate person in the circumstance, and she has bravely agreed to be the spokesperson. So you may see Commissioner Angers in the news. Wish her luck. And Commissioner Angers, we will certainly talk to you more about what that means. Next slide, please. This is an example. I just want to kind of highlight for you. You've agreed to hold a listening session on June 27th as your next meeting. This is just an example of what an agenda typically looks like for a listening session that we hold through the transition team. As you can see, it's about 2 hours long. This is a ranked choice voting example, by the way. It's kind of our most recent listening session example, but we can spend as much time or as little time as you want in the educational presentation part of it. But in a 2-hour meeting, it's typically divided in half by an hour of you presenting the proposal, explaining the criteria and your methodology, kind of walking people through an understanding of how you arrived at your proposal. And then we would break whoever's attending into different breakout groups. And each of you commissioners would serve as facilitators in those breakout rooms and, you know, have a guided discussion with folks who are attending to get this feedback that we're looking for from participants in front of the community. That this agenda can look differently if you want. We will certainly provide you with, you know, facilitation guides so that it's, you know, you don't have to make it up. You can certainly follow along the guide. We could also ask different questions than the survey, or we could just follow the survey questions and use that as your guiding questions in your listening session. So I'm going to stop talking and see if there's any thoughts about this. Here's a question. Commissioner Cooney, thank you. What is working for? Is there any of you commissioners who would not like to facilitate a breakout, even with a facilitation guide? Is there anyone who just cannot stomach the idea of facilitating a breakout room? We would also provide note takers, but I'm not seeing any major hangups about this. Sounds like this is how we are going to structure it. I will certainly put together an agenda for the listening session, facilitation materials, and publish them to you as soon as possible. And then you can let me know if you have any questions or concerns about that before we get to the June 27th meeting, and I'll work with your co-chairs to refine that. Does that work? Okay, ooh, you're checking along. Okay. Last slide, please, or actually almost last slide. I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Cooney to talk about.
Okay, so we don't have a lot on the June schedule at this point. We have our survey going out on Friday, the 16th. Very exciting. We have our ISC listening session on the 27th. And then let's see, so I think, Jamie, I'm not sure, the council work session.
Oh, yeah, that was on there as a kind of previous bit of information, but we will be updating the council during the work session about your proposal and where you're at.
Got it. Okay, just want to make sure I wasn't missing something there. So then I think we can go to the next slide about July. So this one is where our community engagement starts to get a little bit more potentially intense. So there are a number of hearings starting on July 5th. There's a hearing downtown from 6 to 8. There's one on the east side for on the 6th from 6 to 8, another on the 8th. You can see all the dates here. So what I think one of our purposes here tonight is determining if we have folks who could attend these, if we're interested in attending these and tabling these, if we want to target certain ones, if we want to try to go to all of them. So there are obviously a number of these. Are there any thoughts on which we would want to attend? Do we want to try out for all of them, for certain, for one for each area? What, anybody have some thoughts on that?
And just to be clear, thank you, Commissioner Cooney. Just to be clear, this would be a tabling event, so you would be there in the room. It will be hybrid kind of listening sessions. where the IDC is gonna go through a process similar to the agenda I just showed you. They're gonna do an educational presentation, and then they're gonna take public testimony. I don't think they're gonna do breakout rooms, but they're just gonna take testimony. You would be in person in the hybrid location or the in-person location, wherever they're choosing that, and have a table on the side and have, you know, there's table poster materials, would have flyers with QR codes so that folks could take the survey right there. You would have materials to help explain the proposal directly. And we would only need one, maybe two commissioners at each of these locations during these sessions. We can't have 3 or more of you because it would become a public meeting. So 1 or 2 at most. So you can kind of divide and conquer if you want to do it. Okay, turn it back over to you.
I'm happy to do the 5th downtown.
Take it for the 5th.
So we don't know the locations yet. I'm a bike and TriMet only, so it really matters.
We do not have locations yet. The
Okay.
downtown will be at the Portland building, I can tell you that, but other than that, we don't have locations now that I know of. I think that's actually one of the decisions. The IDC is actually meeting tonight in a work group session to kind of finalize their plan. So
I can potentially do the North Portland one on the 12th, just depending on where it is.
there are 2 North Portland ones, one on the 8th and the 12th. Are you just available for the 12th?
I'm out of town on the 8th.
I could do the 16th.
Commissioner Cooney can do the 16th in East Portland. I see in the chat that Commissioner Martinez can do the 15th downtown. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have the 5th, the 12th, the 15th, and the 16th identified. That would be 2 downtown, 1 in North Northeast, and 1 in East Portland. Does anyone want to attend one of the Southeast meetings on either the 9th or the 13th?
I cannot do those weekends. I could definitely do the 12th, but I know you already have someone on that.
Okay.
And then looking at the 13th. And I could probably, so I could do the 12th. I think I could do the 13th if we need someone at Southeast. I'm not in Southeast, but I can go there.
Okay, so the 5th, the 12th, the 13th, 15th, and the 16th. Commissioner Medras can also do the 15th. So we have a pair on the 15th, potential pair on the 12th, and single commissioners on the 5th, 13th, and 16th. I feel like I'm calling bingo. Oh, Commissioner Medras, the 13th, you are also able to do. So we have a pair on the 13th, the 12th.
I just want to clarify, if possible, I would prefer to do one, the 12th or 13th.
Got it. So we will see if Commissioner Angers is available for the 12th, depending on the location.
Yeah, I can get to most places in North and Northeast. It just depends.
Okay. So what I can also do, it sounds like we've identified a number of them. We really need to like know for sure. I mean, I can pass around a sign up sheet later, but we really need to know the specific dates because we're going to be launching all of this kind of social media, for example. So if we don't hear any other interest tonight, then these are the only dates that you're going to be attending, and that's okay too. So we're talking about the 5th, the 12th, 13th, the 15th, and the 16th. So a couple downtown, one in Northeast, one in Southeast, and one in East Portland. Does that feel like a good spread for everyone? Okay, seeing nods.
Yes.
It's great. So how it will go most likely, and we will talk about this more as it gets closer to time. But we as a transition team can certainly transport all of the materials and the stuff. We would just need you to show up and, you know, be available to have the conversations. We'd obviously provide you with all those materials. As a heads up that I will be there in person, but I will be moderating these events. So I will not be at the table with you, but I'm certainly available if you need assistance, and we'll be certainly there to help set up. Except for the 5th, I'm taking the 5th off because it's my birthday. Thank you. Thank you. That's the only one I'll miss. Okay. I think that was our last decision. And I'm sorry we didn't get to go through all of the materials. I appreciate your patience with me. Once again, if you have all the materials available to you. If you have any particular questions or concerns, please send them to me tomorrow, by the end of the day tomorrow, so that the comms team can get them turned around. I'm gonna look to our comms team if they're still in the room and make sure that I did not make promises I couldn't keep, or that you wouldn't be able to keep. Danielle, Francisca, is there any final thing you want to say about materials?
No, just that if there's anything else that's needed or that you feel that we haven't covered that would be helpful in either supporting the reporting of this report or for the hearings, please let us know. You know best what you need, and we're here to provide you all the tools that you need to be successful.
They're the best. Daniel, did you have anything?
I think I've said it better myself. Thanks, Francisca.
Best crew ever. You're lucky to have them. Thank you so much. Okay. Next slide, please. This is almost over. So obviously our next meeting, we just talked about it. I want to encourage you all to get the word out, to, you know, encourage your friends and neighbors and networks to show up to the meeting, to take the survey, to read the report. We're relying on you to help spread the word and get this through your networks as well. And also please pay special attention to your inboxes for updates and info, because things are kind of moving quickly now, and there's a lot of material for us to kind of work through and develop and prepare for. So the listening session is really going to look very different than we've done it before, and it's going to be a whole thing. So we might want to do a run through. We'll figure out how we're going to accomplish the June 27th meeting. But then you're gonna, not really meet again until the 20th, when you are about ready to take your vote and take all of this feedback. So deep breaths. You've done amazing work. You've achieved an incredible milestone in this process. And so I just want to recognize that. Thank everybody for all of your time and your patience and your incredible thoughts.
Nope.
I think she's dismissing us.
This is good night.
Okay, bye.